Welcome back to yet another installment of turning this actual book into an audio book. This is another chapter that was actually shared on the channel way back in the early days, so maybe a few of you will recognize it. It does seem to be a fan favorite. And as usual, this video is going to be a voiceover with some B-roll, so feel free to treat it like any other audio book. But that said, I did go out of my way to get this B-roll in Camden where the story takes place. Now, to be clear, I'm not very familiar with the city of Camden. I don't know where the good and the bad parts are, and at no point when I was driving around getting this B-roll did I feel uncomfortable. So when I'm talking about how bad Camden is in this story, don't think that I'm necessarily commentating on the neighborhoods I was in when I was driving around the other day. And those crime stats are from when the story took place a couple of years ago. From my understanding, Camden has gotten a little better. I just thought it'd be a nice little touch getting the actual city that the story takes place in. I do have to say that when I was getting this footage, I am so glad that I caught this instance on camera. And this little personal anecdote I'm about to tell you sums up Camden. This was a couple years ago, but my uncle was working in Camden and he was stopped at a red light when a police car pulls up next to him. Now, he has Pennsylvania plates, so the cop knows that he's out of state, and the cop asks, "What are you doing?" My uncle, who was in a work truck, says to the cop, "I'm working." The cop says, "Oh, well, just a tip, you shouldn't stop at red lights around here." And the cop proceeds to blow through the red light himself. And that story right there pretty much sums up Camden. But the ironic thing is, the other day when I was getting this B-roll in Camden, I saw what at first glance you might think is a guy running red lights. But now that you know better, you know that he's most likely an upstanding citizen doing just what the police would suggest.
Hope you like this story, and make sure you're subscribed so you can be notified when the next installment comes every Sunday. Chapter 2, Uber Daycare.
It didn't take long after I signed up for Uber that I had to drive a student to school. It was uncomfortable being alone with a minor, but being that Uber didn't have any policies in place against it at the time, I would have felt even more uncomfortable kicking her out. Plus, the fact that this rider happened to be black and female made me think it wise to take her without protest and avoid the risk of seeing my picture next to a headline that read, "Racist Uber driver kicks out girl trying to get to school." What I found most ironic about that ride, however, was that just a hop, skip, and jump away from the girl's house were her classmates standing on the corner waiting for the school bus. Now, if you've never driven for Uber, I'd bet dollars to donuts that your opinion of taking a cab to school depends on what side of the aisle you're on. I can already hear liberals assuming it to be those evil 1%ers too good for a public school bus and pointing to it as an example of income inequality and the need to redistribute the wealth. On the other hand, I can still hear my very Republican uncle, after I told him how often I drive kids to school, saying, "Well, that's exactly why everyone's so goddamn broke these days, living above their means and not teaching their kids the value of a dollar." He doesn't have a southern accent, but when he gets on those rants, that's how I hear it. As it turns out, both sides have some truth to them. I've taken kids to school from government project housing and from houses that have 2 front doors. That's right, the house was so big it had 2 front-facing entrances. I didn't know which one to pull up to, so I kind of split the two, and it didn't matter. They ended up coming out of the garage anyway. So, regardless of socioeconomic status, the convenience and comfort that Uber offered was enough to transcend social class and financial responsibility. And I accepted giving rides to unaccompanied minors as just another overlooked reality of this gig. That is, until one day when I was in South Philadelphia near the river that separates Pennsylvania and New Jersey. I got a request on the other side of the water in Camden. The running joke with New Jersey is that it's such a dump, they don't charge you to come in, but they charge you when you leave. I was a solid 20 minutes away, so I didn't want to commit to crossing the bridge only to have the rider get impatient and cancel the trip. Then I'd be stuck with the $5 toll to get home. I called my rider to let her know I'm on my way, and she assured me she wouldn't cancel because the ride is for her daughter who needs to get to school. "Cool, I'll be there soon," I said, and hung up, thinking nothing of it. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to a long line of row homes. A mom and 3 elementary school kids with backpacks were walking out of their front door. I was confused at first, as the woman on the phone only mentioned a daughter, and I started dreading the trip ahead. I had given quite a few round-trip rides to elementary schools where the parents will ride along with their little ones so they weren't alone in the Uber. drop the kids off at school, and then I would take the parent back home or to work. I hated it because it would usually entail getting stuck in the drop-off line, which, for those who have never experienced it, is the most inefficient form of traffic flow in modern society. I get it, child safety first, but when you're stuck in that line clearing $2 an hour and a couple of snot-nosed kids who you don't know are crying in the back seat about having to go to school, you start thinking about how the world has enough kids as is, and you get comfortable with the idea of a little less safety precautions and a little more of getting me the hell out of there. So I was relieved when the mom and the 3 kids piled into the car ahead of me. But in the house next to the one they had just come out of, a girl waved at me through her storm door, pointing at her phone as a way of asking if I was her Uber. I responded with a thumbs up to indicate to her I was indeed her driver. This young girl opened the door, and from behind her legs ran a child so small that with every stride she took, her Disney school bag would hit her calves. This tiny human sprinted across the lawn directly to my back door and grabbed hold of the handle with both hands. Using all of her body weight, she leaned back to pull it open. She got in like it was just another typical morning, but then struggled to reach and pull the door shut as her size made it nearly impossible. I was shocked that this girl was riding by herself and stepped out of my car thinking that the mom might want to talk to me. When the mom saw me get out, however, she quickly waved at me and shut her front door. Well, I guess this is what we're doing then, I thought, as the girl continued to struggle with the door. I walked around to the passenger side of the car, said, "Watch your hands and feet," and I shut the door. Okay, so looking back, I handled this very poorly. First of all, in the fine print of Uber's terms of use, turns out there were a few lines about people using the service having to be over a certain age. I can't tell you what exactly it said back then, but I'm sure it was phrased in a way to cover Uber's ass in case anything happened, but at the same time buried to make sure most drivers miss it. More recently, they've been a little more transparent about drivers not taking minors, but when the company was still expanding, they couldn't let something as trivial as child safety stand in their way. My second major mistake was, apparently, babies aren't the only people in the world that require car seats. How the hell was my childless ass supposed to know that kids as old as 12 still use booster seats? In case you haven't pieced it together yet, as uncomfortable as I was, I stupidly went ahead with this ride. And immediately after we left, I heard a shuffling in my back seat. And when I looked in the rear view, I saw this girl struggling to get her seatbelt on. On a related note regarding my YouTube, I was very surprised when I started getting comments on my videos charging me with the responsibility to make sure that my adult passengers put on their seatbelts. It didn't even cross my mind that my channel displays the more common than not choice people make not to wear one. There's something about riding in a car for hire that makes people think they don't need seatbelts, as if a car crash in a ride you paid for doesn't hurt as much as one you didn't. I often want to remind people that my license is the same as anyone else's. It's not like I went through some sort of special rideshare school to qualify me as a safe driving expert. I'm just a financially desperate soul being exploited by Uber for my cheap labor and the fact that I own a car. That said, I learned early on that at best, it's a massive waste of energy to ask every single person who gets into my Uber to put on a seatbelt. At worst, it's asking for a fight. So typically, it's not something I concern myself with, but seeing this girl struggle was quite the conundrum. On one hand, it reminded me of the importance of seatbelts and made me think, yeah, of course this child should be belted in. On the other hand, I operate on a strict no touching passengers policy, and that rule could never be more important when the passenger is a little girl. As I debated this dilemma in my head, I finally heard a click, and that sound was a source of relief, but only temporarily, because when I looked in the rear view, I saw the most mangled and twisted seatbelt arrangement you can possibly imagine, with the top strap twisted and tucked directly on this girl's neck. I could not let it stay like that, so I pulled over to the side of the road. "We're just gonna fix that seatbelt for you," I said before turning and reaching into the back seat. Her face looked exactly like you would expect a girl's face to look when a bearded stranger is telling her what to do. I pulled the top strap out from under her neck and told her to put her arms up and over it, pulling it down under her armpits. It didn't look like the safest thing in the world, but at least it wasn't choking her anymore. As we got back on our way, it was obvious that she was just as uncomfortable as I was, and the former teacher in me tried to break the ice with small talk. "So, what grade are you in?" "First." "Oh my goodness gracious. What's your favorite subject?" "Recess." "Oh, other than recess." I don't know." She didn't laugh at my other than recess tone, making me think that maybe I came off a little strong. So at that point I thought, maybe I should just shut up. Probably for the best, being that I had no idea what to talk about with a 6-year-old. The awkwardness in my car was interrupted by a call coming through the Uber app. It was her mother. This posed a problem as I was already playing traffic ticket roulette. Not only was I driving for Uber, a car service that was still illegal in New Jersey at the time, and not only was there a young girl who I didn't know in my car, riding without a car seat, but nothing will get a New Jersey cop's attention faster than talking on a cell phone while driving. If I answer this phone, I thought, I'm basically begging to get pulled over. But I can't ignore this lady's call when I have her daughter in the car, right? Well, I am so glad I made the choice that I did. "Hello?" I said, eyes peeled for police. "Hi, I actually put the wrong address in. You're going the wrong way," the mom said, very nonchalantly. "Excuse me?" My heart started pounding. I don't know how this plays out, I thought, but it feels like I'm getting set up for something bad. She gave me another address, and I prayed that the new destination was actually a school. I didn't know what I would do if it wasn't. In my head, I started to practice the speech I would give if I had to explain myself to law enforcement or child services. "Look, officer, in retrospect, I realize I should have never picked up this kid in the first place, but I swear I am not a kidnapper. I don't even like kids." As I pictured a scenario in which I get pulled over, I caught myself thinking that, hey, at least being a white man with a young black girl would be better than the reverse. I don't subscribe to the idea of white privilege often, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a solid argument against it here. Fortunately, after 10 more minutes of awkward silence as I ran through every worst-case scenario in my head, we pulled up to a school, but I was not yet in the clear. You have to understand something about Camden, New Jersey. It's not what you would call a nice place. This city was so bad that just 2 years prior to this ride, it made national news for abolishing its entire police force. That's right. The people who were supposed to protect Camden were considered so corrupt that the city decided they were hurting more than helping and let everyone go. At the time, almost 40% of its 77,000 residents lived below the poverty line, and the city was home to over 3,000 abandoned buildings, 175 known open-air drug markets, and a crime rate high enough to rank it among the most dangerous cities in America. With all that in mind, there was no chance in hell I was leaving the scene until I made sure this girl got into school safely. The school was in the middle of a city block, and there was only space for me to pull over across the street from the school's entrance. Though not a part of my usual services, I made an exception and got out of my car to open the girl's door for her. We can pretend it's because I'm a nice guy, but in reality, I didn't have any other option. She literally wouldn't have been able to get out otherwise. I looked both ways before I gave her the go-ahead to cross the street and was laser focused on her every step. There was no way I was going to let myself make it through that excruciating ride only to have this kid end up getting hit by a car. She cleared the roadway, thank God, and then took what was to her a big step to get up on the sidewalk and headed directly for the school's entrance. Like a lot of city schools, for safety, there's a camera on the door and you have to get buzzed in. Standing on her tippiest of tippy toes, this little girl reaches up and presses the button, but the door doesn't open. She does it again. Still nothing. This child was so short that she wasn't coming into view of the camera, and whoever was watching the door couldn't see her, so they weren't unlocking the door. I'm watching this unfold, not knowing what I'm supposed to do. On one hand, there's no way I'm leaving her there, but on the other, I felt very uncomfortable walking up to this school on behalf of a child that I don't know. How's that conversation go? Hi, I don't know this 6-year-old girl, but I brought her here in my car. Could you let her in? I feel like the natural question that creates is, sir, what are you doing with this child, and can I see some identification? Next thing I know, I'm being told to wait in the principal's office, and I overhear an adult telling the little girl, show me on the doll where he touched you. And that's when my self-awareness kicked in. I am a man in my bum-like Uber attire of baggy sweats and well-worn sneakers, with a very unkempt beard to boot, staring intently at a little girl outside of a school. I was not going to leave this girl before I knew that she was safe inside, but I felt the longer I watched, the creepier I seemed. I had to throw all caution to the wind. I crossed the street with the intent to buzz this girl in myself, fully aware of the Dateline Catch a Predator vibes I'd give off. But just as I got to the sidewalk, I noticed a mom and 2 kids come around the corner heading for the door. I stopped dead in my tracks and did a 180 back to my car, looking over my shoulder to make sure that this lady held the door for my 3-foot-tall Uber client, which, of course, she did. On my ride back to Philly, I wondered if that mom who held the door would tell anyone how she saw a homeless-looking white guy hanging out in front of her kid's school, making a beeline to a young girl before she showed up. I wondered how often that kid takes an Uber to school, and I wondered if her mom was concealing her panic on that phone call after she realized she had entered the wrong address, or if she was actually as calm as she sounded. After all, your 6-year-old daughter in a car with a strange man driving in the wrong direction is a typical start to a day, right? Hope you guys enjoyed this story. If you want to grab a copy for yourself, the book is available at the link in the description. Otherwise, I'll see you for another installment next Sunday. Thanks for watching. Got the Sixers play-in game today. Gotta have it front-facing.
Her with a gun, believing that she was connected to the threats he'd been receiving, and now